Charles, hello.
Welcome back, Jason.
Thank you. From a long distance away, for sure. Back.
It's great to have you back in one piece.
Charles. Yeah. You know, New Zealand, they've all those dangerous sheep around, so I had to be very careful while I was over there. What happened while I was gone?
Well, evidently what may not have happened is Hillary Clinton was, I think, supposed to show up for a cocktail party, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was pretty sure from what I was reading that it was a cocktail party that she was going to be at, but the description page for the event disappeared behind a sold out button after it was over. So when I went back to check what the exact wording was, it was unclear, what had been advertised. So we're going to have a very special guest today who might be audio only. Ted, can you hear me all right? Can you hear us, Ted? Well, we're having some technical difficulties with our guest, but we'll continue to try to make that happen. Charles, what are we going to get into today?
Well, I think this is a week where we're going to hear a lot of that Shaggy song out of many, many members of the Democratic establishment and the media complex, the academic complex. They're all going to be saying it wasn't me.
Right.
Because what really is happening now, and hats off to the art department again, evidently jet lag does not affect the art department, because this really was one of my all-time favorite movies. I shouldn't admit that, but I really enjoyed The Revenge of the Nerds. and what's happened, I think, is that the plot to really steal control of the United States for a long, long time, away from any opponents of the Obama, Clinton, and dare I argue, Bush establishment machine, that plot, I think, effectively has now been stopped.
Good.
By Donald Trump and his people, who are now, I think, rather firmly in control, almost firmly in control of the environment in Washington, D.C. So, as you're correct to point out, we are most honored to have a gentleman who's recovering from Prince Harry's wedding over there in England. Ted Malloch, the distinguished academic and visionary businessman, is joining us today with comments on his new book.
How are you, Ted? We see you clearly now, but I'm not sure we can hear you. Can you hear me? We've got no audio on you, unfortunately, sir. Let me just see here. Do you have your microphone muted by any chance?
Could be. It was working before.
It was. We will get to the bottom of this soon enough. So
could be a deep state monkey business.
Deep state monkey business, exactly.
Well, why don't we go to the next slide while we're trying to figure out this audio, and I'll talk for a bit while Ted is trying to get his audio up.
Yes.
Ted Malloch is somebody I met a number of years ago through our mutual friend Jerry Corsi, and he started out as I did in banking, but then he was very much involved in diplomacy and academia. We'll talk about his really decades of operating at the very highest levels of CEO and government leader type business and other efforts around the world. And then during the 2015-16 timeframe, he was one of the early people to come out in favor of Donald Trump and to argue why it was time in this country that we have somebody without the kind of deep swamp rat political experience come in and actually try to fix what ails us in the United States. And I think obviously Donald Trump is a man with considerable resources and talents, but I think it would be wrong to underestimate the positive effect that Ted Malloch had beginning to get thinking people to say, let's take a look at this Donald Trump character. And so Ted was very effective writing article after article, doing appearance after appearance on many different channels. and he's written several books. He's with us today to talk about his latest book, just out Tuesday.
And we've got picture on you, Ted, but no audio. Can you hear us? Ted, do you hear us? Can't hear you.
Yeah.
I don't know. We had audio but no picture prior, and now we've got...
So it's clear that the deep state does not want Ted Malloch's message out.
Right.
We're in a good shape because I have read your book, Ted, and I can talk to the issues that are on the slide involving you if we can't get your audio. So rest assured we will get the message across one way or the other.
Ted, can you raise a hand if you hear us? We do not hear you, sir. You can hear us.
Okay.
Okay. But we can't hear you, so I don't know.
Is it a volume control on this?
It's not. I've got the volume control turned up, and
Why don't I do this, Jason?
yeah, we've got volume turned up.
Why don't you let me go to the next slide, and
Sure.
I'll take the next slide
Sure.
while you're trying to figure out Ted's audio.
Sure.
Well, this is an old standby for us. We begin every presentation, as our regular listeners know, talking about the unique approach we take. We are not fake news. We are not traditional news. We are, in this presentation, expressing our First Amendment rights based on informed analysis of many primary and secondary sources. What we like to do is give people a chance to read our sources, explore them. That's why virtually all of our presentations are up on various crowdsource channels. You can pull them down free of charge. At your leisure, you can go back. We've been talking, Jason, in your absence, a number of very fine people have come to me over the internet and elsewhere and offered to put together repositories of these various documents. And there's one person, I can't say the name, down in South America who's already done that. And there's another person in the Midwest who has volunteered to help with this. There is now, we've done, I think this is our like 73rd or 4th or 5th show. It's getting to be quite a few.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of information. Most presentations have around 8-10 slides. This is going to be short today with just 5.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of information in here. And rather than just skim along the top of the waves, as many people who are critical tend to do, I would encourage those who want to engage on the substance of what we're arguing here to get into the primary data, read the books we've recommended, go look at all the primary sources, and you will soon, if you do not conclude very quickly that this is the largest set of unprosecuted charity frauds in history, I can safely say that you haven't done the work that you need to do to get educated on the issue. So we've put up here Ted Malloch's Twitter handle is below mine and yours, Jason, in the middle here. And we also have at the bottom this playlist, which Jason is regularly updating.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Ted Malloch's Twitter handle. Sorry, just trying to...
It's right here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ted, I'm not sure why we don't have audio on you. I think it might be audio and video settings. Okay. Sorry, we've got a few things happening here. Okay, wait.
There you go.
Got you. Okay, now we have audio.
Finally, okay.
Thank you
should
so
have
much.
video too, right?
We do. We have everything.
I just restarted the computer. I don't know.
Wonderful.
I
Sometimes
think that
that's
you're bugged.
all it
I
takes.
personally really think that you're bugged.
Okay. Lovely to have you with us, Ted. Thank you so much.
Yeah, there are probably a lot of people listening in.
Yes.
There are. And many of them are friendly, but unfortunately enough of them seem to be unfriendly.
Yeah.
So, Ted, I don't know how pressed for time you are. We can do your slide first and then finish without you, or if you could stay for the whole presentation, we can do it as you wish.
Yeah, let's give it a shot.
All right. So why don't we go to the next slide, Jason, if we can?
Sure. I just wanted to show everyone Ted's Twitter handle, of course, so people can follow him on Twitter. We're having, in addition to all this other wonderful stuff, incredible computer slowdown here.
Right.
But people can follow Ted on Twitter at Ted Malloch. And of course, tedmalloch.com is his webpage. And you wanted to get back to the slides.
The next slide, yeah.
Next slide.
So what we're going to do, Ted, is we're just going to this is to set up the discussion of your book. We like to talk every week about the important things that happened in the preceding week. Then we'll get to you, and then we'll talk about what is going to happen, we think, in the coming week. So
Okay.
there's no question that, in my mind at this point, that Donald Trump's early allegations back in March, I think, of 2017, that he had been wiretapped are absolutely true, and they well understate the true degree to which the surveillance state that I think began under George W. Bush in spades after 9/11, but was accentuated under Barack Obama. There's no question in my mind that the plot to entrench Democrats in power began well before Donald Trump announced, well before I wrote the piece about the Clinton Foundation in March of 2015. I think this was a long-standing plot, frankly, and it's good on Donald Trump for standing up, facing down the deep state, and good on you, Ted, for taking the heat that you've taken, because I think you've been a victim of this as well.
Yeah, well, the definition of wiretap, of course, is something that has been misconstrued because it's not the old-fashioned, guy in the telephone booth tapping your wires. In this case, we have the deep state using all kinds of very high technology, basically to find out what American citizens are doing, and in some cases using FISA courts to do that on illegitimate information. Or over and above that, and I think that it is abundantly clear now, we also have foreign intelligence sources, some of whom are allied with the United States, who are using their intelligence and signals intelligence to spy on Americans and American political actors. And this is verified by someone, if you can believe this, who certainly would be in the know, and his name is Tony Blair.
Yeah. It's outrageous. And if we think, when Jason and I got involved with this August of 2017, we realized that the real story here was not simply the Clinton Foundation fraud, it wasn't simply the election, it was the perversion of justice, the double standard that political actors, primarily in the Democratic Party, but I believe some in the Republican Party too, believe that elections are about gaining control of the levers of power and then harnessing those levers of power to persecute your enemies and to entrench and enrich your friends. And that is not what I signed up for as a citizen of this country, and I don't think it's what you signed up for, Ted, and it's boldly illegal.
And, there have been other points in American history where certainly there were wrongdoings or people crossed the line, but we see nothing like we have to the extent we have had here in these last few years. We've crossed over the line completely. When I worked in the Senate, it was actually a fairly bipartisan place. People got along, worked together. Obviously, they had political campaigns against their adversaries, but they were, gentlemen, and they carried on their interest in a kind of disinterested way. That is not the case any longer. What we have witnessed, I think, now is something that people are referring to, and I think it's now become almost a trite phrase, and that is the weaponization of intelligence. We have actually seen the intelligence agencies and the FBI used by one political camp to harm the other political camp. And you only have to ask if the shoe are on the other foot. If President Bush were doing this against President Obama or some other historical period in the past, what would we be saying? This is just unacceptable American behavior. It's not only illegal, it just crosses every threshold of wrongdoing.
And Ted, do you feel that this is a significant departure from what was done in the 1970s during Watergate? Wasn't Nixon using CIA agents to spy on McGovern?
Yeah, if you go back to that period, there at least seems to be some evidence that there were agents both in the White House, so-called plumbers, and agents who were either in the intelligence agencies or who were previously in the intelligence agencies who were used to break in to the Democratic headquarters, which is, of course, the Watergate building in Washington, D.C., down on the Potomac River. And, of course, that brought down the entire government. I mean, it was one of the biggest scandals. I think, frankly, I was in college at the time. but it was one of the biggest scandals, of our lives. And here we have something that goes far beyond that, far, far beyond that. And we can go over the details of what's involved because I try to unearth them in my little book, The Plot to Destroy Trump. But this is a scandal that is, I think, 100 times bigger than Watergate.
Yeah, well, let's hold that thought, Jason, and just keep going through these slides quickly, and then we'll get into it in depth in your book. Just to bring people up to date, what one roadblock to getting the truth about the Clinton Foundation and other related charity frauds out was that one of the, if not the biggest Attorney General's office that has a subsection that focuses on charity fraud is in New York. And that office has been run by Democrats, I would argue corrupt Democrats, since January of 1999. So in order to get real focus and attention and get investigators both in the FBI and internationally to go after anybody, you'd have to run through the interference caused by Schneiderman. Well, that's out the door now, and which is a good thing. It's a great thing. So there has been a sea change that I've written 2 articles about so far, and I'm going to be going more and more in depth into it because New York laws on the books are extremely strict, particularly about using an endowment corruptly to enrich yourselves. And I will be demonstrating in chapter and verse in coming weeks how that happened actually in New York from secret offices involving secret allies of Chelsea Clinton and her husband. So, and we're talking a large fraud. It's a $184 million endowment that has not been explained properly and is not being used properly, and we'll be getting into great depth in that. Another thing
is that a new fraud, Chelsea and her husband?
It's a corner. It's like the whole Clinton Foundation thing is so big, the fraud. It's declared $2.3 billion. This is only a $184 million piece of it. So it's it's serious. People go to jail for $1 million frauds for a long time. Ask Corinne Brown about that. But Ted, one thing that has happened, which is good, is there's a fellow out of all this in the UK, very persistent, who approached us, Jason and me, a while back, and said, listen, I want to go to my MP, and I want to push my MP to find out what's going on with the UK government's support for the Clinton Foundation via this entity called Unitate. And he did that, and he got, there's now an inquiry open in Parliament because of this guy. It's going to take time, it'll be resisted. A lot of people are going to be embarrassed here, including Tony Blair. And there are a lot of charities that are going to be embarrassed, but this is a positive step that happened in the UK in the last week.
And I think in addition to Sunday with Charles and closing in, we might consider a new weekly program called Fraud of the Week. And we could feature a new Clinton Foundation fraud every week.
Well, no one knows more on this subject. No one has studied it harder or in more depth than Charles Ortel. So, I mean, the government could go to school on the work he's done, and I hope they actually do take the time. And this means not only the U.S. Government or the state governments, as you've just mentioned, where there are many attorneys general, who are involved in this question, but even the foreign governments like India and governments like Australia and certainly governments like the UK. They need to look at what is really I called this in an article a couple of years ago, the largest kleptocracy in American history. But I did a little studying on the history of kleptocracy. Maybe Charles can describe what that is. But, in the all-time biggest kleptocrats of the 20th century, the Clintons are basically up in the top 10.
Yeah, they're way up there.
Got to be number 1 with a bullet.
Well, they have competitors like Mobutu and others. So, this is the league that they're playing in.
Wow.
Well, Ted, we've talked about this before, but we'll break a little bit of news here. So when you look at the Clinton Foundation on its own, you're right, it doesn't leap to the top. But when you understand how much it's tied into the fraud in India Inc. and McKinsey and Rajat Gupta and the American India Foundation, and then you start thinking about the Clintons inserting corrupt former leaders in Scandinavia and elsewhere into the UN bureaucracy to channel all this, to get between all the global aid flows before they get down into Africa, before they get into South America and Asia. When you start putting that all together and you think about global governance and how that it's not really regulated global governments that people wanted. It was completely unregulated global governance. When you look at that, it is massive. And there are another thing.
It scales up. I wonder, I saw the Secretary General Gutierrez was in to see Clinton, I think it was last Thursday, for an hour meeting. I wonder if they discussed this at all, Charles.
I bet you Gutierrez was trying to figure out which Swiss bank to use. But one thing for you, Ted, that we've made a contact with the person will remain nameless, but an excellent and well-placed Norwegian who has been spending now, I'd say, almost 2 months looking into this with contacts in Norway and contacts in many of these governments. And he's making great progress convincing African, either former leaders or current leaders, to realize that they've been defrauded. And so I think what we could be seeing here with the degree to which that Donald Trump and his people are stepping up the pressure now, the Horowitz report dropping, I think we could see a sea change, and a very rapid sea change in attitudes coming, thanks to the work you're doing, Ted, exposing the deep state, and thanks to the work that Donald Trump, of course, has been doing. I think Trump is imminently going to make radical changes at the Justice Department and the IRS. I know his efforts to get the, we've got that up later,
People can't see that.
okay, his efforts to get somebody in the IRS, I think, have been stymied so far because they haven't held a hearing on the guy yet, as far as I know.
Right.
But I don't know if you want.
There is a chapter in my book, Charles, and I think you're footnoted a few times, where I try to tie back the Fusion GPS story back to the question of Uranium-1 and the linkages there. And I do suggest that this actor, who's of course a very wealthy individual named Frank Gustra, who's a Canadian, is very important. And if we're going to look at any one person in coming weeks and months, he'd be a very good one to focus on because he has a double role to play.
Oh, absolutely, Frank Justra, and another one is, of course, Alexander Downer.
Correct.
Yeah, and this
Alexander Downer is, of course, tied to the Papadopoulos story, which seems rather fictitious now on the face of it. But he was, as you know, an Australian who was very involved, and I believe even some kind of advisor or trustee to the Clinton Foundation, and arranged for some very large gifts on the order of 25 million from Australia into the Clinton Foundation.
Yeah, well, actually, what he did, you're right, he was the foreign minister of Australia, and his signature is on a memorandum of understanding signed, I think, in February of 2006, committing Australia to send, at that moment, 25 million into the Clinton Foundation. But afterwards, they sent almost 100 million, all told, to an entity that never legally existed validly. And, and here's a man, I don't understand, I was talking to the Norwegian fellow, how government leaders would take that magnitude of money, 25 million in the case of Norway, 100 million in the case of Australia, and nobody would do any checking. Of like, how can the government of Australia give $100 million to an entity that doesn't exist?
Well, it was clearly a pay-to-play scheme, and it was based on someone having a high political office who was supposed to become President of the United States and leader of the whole world. And of course, when that didn't happen, the whole house of cards came tumbling down.
Right, but I've never been in government, nor do I want to be in government. But I would imagine the process is that you need $100 million. You're Australian, and you go, "Hey, g'day, mate. Can I have $100 million?" and somebody says, "Well, could you fill out a form?" Like, okay, I'll fill out a form.
ID?
And then it's like you got to get it wired. I mean, do they just fill up a cargo plane with Australian money? And no, they got to wire it. You got to figure out there must be records of the accounts. And you know, Ted, better than I, that our government and most of the big governments around the world have the ability to trace every single wire that has ever happened in the last about 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, how come nobody traced any of this?
Perhaps everyone in Australian Parliament is wired.
Yeah, that's right.
After the fact, I think that not only do we find these governments not making these kinds of contributions, but now we see some buyer remorse. So they will be tracing these wires.
Yeah, let's hope. I wonder, Jason, if we could just pull up this bottom link here, which is the letter from Chuck Grassley. It's the first part of it. Oops, that's the second part. Yeah. Ted, I don't know if you saw this, but one of the real heroes in all this is Senator Chuck Grassley. I mean,
he's a hero on many fronts.
Oh no.
Including on the dossier question. He's been a very important senator with lots of integrity for a very long time. So he does have a backbone.
He really does, and he's. If we can't get the actual letter, the link below it, Jason has a story about the letter. So Grassley has just put out a letter that is brutal against Rosenstein and against this whole process of how exactly did this inquiry start. I want to see. This is the story about it. And I don't know, Ted, do you watch this site, The Last Refuge?
Don't know that I've seen that. I've seen so many of these sites, and there are
conservative treehouse
proliferation of them. So
this is the conservative treehouse, and this poster is Sundance. And this person, I don't know who it is, but this person, there's the letter, full PDF below. Do you see that on the right?
What is going on?
You have deep state interference. There's a full PDF below, right there. This may get you the letter, but. Yeah, here we go. So Grassley is being extremely aggressive, going after Rosenstein, not taking these excuses, not accepting this idea that they're going to delay and delay and delay. And when the final story is told here, Chuck Grassley, I don't know what award you can give him, but I mean this is a man who really takes his job seriously, and is doing excellent work. I'm in touch with one of the staffers for Chuck, who's very, very thorough and very decent and honorable. And I think it's time, across the political spectrum, we need to understand that the scales of justice need to be evenly balanced here, because there will be a day when there might be somebody who could be even more aggressive than Donald Trump and even more unprincipled than the Clintons and it seems what Barack Obama were. And do you want that person to use the precedents that were set here to go after progressives and Democrats? And I think the answer is no, you don't. So this is a time for grown-ups to stand up and be counted, which is an excellent introduction to the next page, Jason, which is an introduction to a grown-up, Ted Malloch. And Ted, what we've got here for you is your bio. If we just could hit that bio link. And Ted, I will not do justice to your introduction, and maybe if you could take a few minutes and tell the audience.
Well, we could sum it up. People could read that, but my bio is basically scholar, diplomat, strategist. So those three words, I think, are the best to sum it up. And I've done a lot of things, and I've been fortunate to have been in a number of places. Both politically and economically, working with CEOs. And in the last 20, 25 years, I've had the good fortune to run a lot of things that are sort of strategy, foresight, or scenarios planning for large corporations. And I've also been, of course, a research professor at Yale, a professor and a senior fellow at Oxford University, and a professor at Henley Business School. And I've written, my wife says I have to stop writing books. I think I've just published my 17th book.
Wow. And you are a descendant, I believe, of Theodore Roosevelt.
Yes, distant.
Uh-huh. And that
and
book,
of course, is this book that came out just a week, 10 days ago, The Plot to Destroy Trump, How the Deep State Fabricated the Russian Dossier to Subvert the President. And it took 8 or 9 months to write. It's based on public information, so it's not a secret book or something where people are disclosing deep state secrets by any means. But I had the idea in a telephone call with a financial friend of mine some number of months ago, when she said to me, "This is really like the hunt for Red October And I rejoined and said, no, it's the hunt for Red November. And the conspiracy is really on the other side. So it forced me then to go in and take these 1,000 pieces, and there literally are 1,000 pieces, and try to put the puzzle together so that the public could understand it. Because it is complicated, lots of names, a lot of moving pieces. But when you look at them all, what we have here is, not just a case where people are, what could you say, opposing Donald Trump or resisting Donald Trump or trying to even impeach Donald Trump. We have, in effect, an attempted coup d'etat of the duly elected President of the United States. We have never had such an incident in our long history as a free republic. Only in 1783, if you go back and check your history, was there one occurrence in Newburgh, New York, where Washington's troop tried to stage a mutiny against the Continental Congress. And General Washington talked him out of that act, and in fact, it didn't take place. So we've been very, very lucky in American history. So this is really big stuff.
It is, Ted. Thank you for putting up with it. Thank you for exposing it. Thank you for fighting it. I was initially really pleased to learn that you might have been our ambassador to the EU, and the way in which the deep state took you on in those early days is just ridiculous. And I think you might talk a little bit about that. You were very early on. You were there, I believe, as the Soviet Union fell apart. You were there, and this European Union is dying too slow a death. It should have been gone a long time ago. And you were just the person to be on board early on, but instead, that didn't happen.
Well, it is an interesting set of events. Of course, Trump and his colleagues wanted me to have such a position. I was interviewed for it in Trump Towers twice. I was told at the inauguration by two very influential people, one of whom was Rudy Giuliani, that I had the position. And of course, when I went on television and said some things highly critical of what I call the EU SSR, the forces in Brussels went to work full-time and overtime to stop my candidacy. They made an unprecedented 3 démarches to the Secretary of State, and they accosted Vice President Pence himself in Munich, telling him that I would be a totally unacceptable candidate. So I'm very proud to have on my shelf here, just behind me in my office on the shelf, a letter that was issued by the left wing of the European Parliament saying that Dr. Theodore Roosevelt Malik would be unacceptable as ambassador of the United States to the European Union, and that I should be made what's called in diplomatic parlance persona non grata, that I would not be accepted into such a position.
So that's like an international deplorable.
Yeah. So I jokingly say it wasn't necessary during the period, and this is, of course, most of my life, when the Soviet Union was still in existence, it wasn't necessary that an American ambassador to the Soviet Union be a communist. But now it's necessary that the U.S. ambassador to the EU be a globalist and a sympathizer to that union.
Ted, when I was growing up in the 1980s, I remember constantly hearing about how oppressive and horrible the Soviet Union was. Very recently, you were scooped up at an airport as someone might have been in communist Russia in the 1960s or 70s. What happened there?
Well, I did write about it as the postscript to this book. So my publisher, this is my publisher, not me, probably as a marketer, has gone all over the internet and on tweets and said, this is because the FBI read my book, and this is the one book that they don't want the American public to read. I don't know if that's the case or not, but yeah, I was detained in Boston. I wrote about it. I'm not saying a whole lot more. I've certainly cooperated with interviews with the special counsel's office. I really had very little information for them, but I've willingly answered any questions. They did have a warrant to seize my telephone, and I have finally gotten that telephone back about a month later.
Wow.
So these are actions on the part of the deep state, and now, this kind of behavior, at least in my view, is not typical of the American democracy.
So is it, again, I don't want to get you in trouble in any way, but reading between the tea leaves, it sounds to me as if you may have been a victim of FISA warrant surveillance.
Well, one doesn't know. One does not know. Who's listening to what. I live outside of London, so it could be some other intelligence agency. I'm told by some people in the know that the European countries have been very interested in me because of my criticisms of the EU, because the articles I've written about how Europe seems to be tilted towards Germany. I've said some things that I think are defensible, and I've suggested that Brexit is actually something that the British public should be proud of, and it's obviously a democratic decision that was taken in this country, that's the United Kingdom, over 2 years ago.
It's funny you should mention that. I woke up early on Saturday morning, so I turned on the television, and there was the wedding, and I have to say that I thought the wedding was actually incredibly touching, including the sermon by the African-American bishop from Chicago. It really was heartfelt, touching, thoughtful.
It was very moving, and there was a lot of Americana, obviously a lot of African-American touches, which they have not been exposed to, certainly in, what could you say, British aristocracy. So I watched it, and I found it very beautiful.
What I was going to say, though, on Brexit is that the thought that leapt into my crazy mind is that the international market for things British, is big. And there are a lot of strong ties that Britain has in export markets and trading markets that Germany actually doesn't have because of Germany's history, and that France may have a lesser version of, but very few significant European economies have the ability in 2018 to export and to trade and to invest around the world with so many of these nations that I think it's absurd for Britain, which spends disproportionately more on defense than I think any other European country. It's absurd for them to remain inside the EU.
There are only 5 countries in NATO that actually pay the 2% that was agreed, and of course Britain is one of those. So they also have a special relationship with the United States that goes back a very long time, and I've been a big advocate of that as a kind of Anglophile from this side. I think their future is quite bright when you look at their relationship with the Commonwealth nations, which are, of course, very extensive around the world. And they could have very quickly, in ensuing years, I think, bilateral trade relationships with any number of countries that would be very important to their economy, and I would include amongst them the United States.
Absolutely. So one thing in reading your book, which I do commend and have commended to our audience, and I'll continue to tweet out and circulate it, I was struck, in the appendix section, I was struck by that Steele dossier. And I wanted to ask, is this the first time the Steele dossier has actually been published?
Oh no, the Steele dossier was published by BuzzFeed, in the original setting when it was, reported then on CNN and became then part of public parlance, and CNN took up this cause, which it's run with, ever since. But we felt when we were putting this book together that we should have some document. I mean, it's hopefully a very logical, and it's a very sequential, chronological argument full of data, but we thought that we should also have some appendices that document the things we're talking about. And some people talk about this dossier ad infinitum, but most people have never read it. And if you take the time to read it, it's so fictitious, so silly, so salacious that you would probably dismiss it, in the first few pages. And here we have a government that has used it as a way to defeat a political candidate or attempt to do so, and then to spy on his campaign and to issue FISA warrants. I mean, it is basically, I would say, the critical piece in this whole scenario that we're witnessing in the last year and a half. The dossier is at the center of all of it.
Yeah, the reason I couldn't, when I heard about the dossier, I was like, I don't want to read this garbage because it's obviously garbage. But then I went, so I delayed looking at it, and then the BuzzFeed article, but then I did read it in your book. And I'm not somebody who has any experience looking at classified documents or operating with, security services or anything. I have, on the other hand, bought and sold many, many companies around the world and gotten all kinds of consulting reports and other kind of technical reports. And I looked at the first page of it and I said, this is written by a third grader. It's ridiculous. I mean,
it's very poorly done. And as somebody who does have a lot of government experience, who had top secret and covert clearance when I worked in the State Department, I can tell you this is unlike any document I had ever seen in that context. But it's full of factual errors, misstatements, salacious information. It's all paid for by informants who are, Russian intelligence agents. So it's coming directly from Russia, and worse yet, the more that they pay for, the more they got. There are, as has been pointed out, and I point out 6 very large logical errors in the document. It's also full of typographical errors and misspellings.
Right.
Wow. There's a question coming from our Periscope viewers for both of you gentlemen. They want to know how you feel about Donald Trump's most recent tweet here just 2 hours ago. He's saying, I hereby demand and will do so officially tomorrow that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI/DOJ infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration. What do you guys think about that?
Ted?
Well, I think it's overdue. I mean, it's certainly a fair demand to make. I think if we had an attorney general who was actually acting, we wouldn't be in this situation. But I think over and above and beyond that, the president should basically declassify all of these documents, including the original FISA warrant request, so the American public can see what lies behind this conspiracy.
I think that's an excellent point, and I think tying into that, it would appear to me when we go back on the Steele dossier for a second, the thing that really strikes me about that, our mutual friend Judge Napolitano got in trouble for suggesting on Fox before the election that it was possible there was an informal working arrangement between the U.S. and the U.K. where if the U.S. couldn't get information on U.S. citizens, they rely on the U.K. to do it. I think that's exactly what happened. And I think it's well past time for citizens, American citizens, but also citizens in the UK and other affected countries to bring these intelligence agencies to heel, because it's clear that they were far overstepping their bounds. The clique of globalists that's very comfortable reading The Economist and flying around all these conferences or whatever else, and work in the UK and US security services and academia, that clique was rightly threatened by Donald Trump. And now they need to be fully exposed for what they did to fight this, and they need to be fully punished. Examples need to be set so that this kind of stuff doesn't happen again, because unless we're all hit by an EMP weapon, technology is going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, and the ability of these rogue actors and these crooks, frankly, in the securities agencies to put their boots on our necks is only going to get stronger and stronger. Examples need to be set here, Ted, don't you think?
No, I don't think you're out of bounds at all. I mean, if you take former Prime Minister Blair at his word, we know the answer to at least one of those questions. But I think the more that this becomes unearthed, we're going to see that the character who instigated this whole thing, who is involved at the center of the whole thing, that means helping the dossier, funding various parts of this conspiracy, and weaponizing intelligence, is none other than the former head of the CIA, John Brennan.
Well, Ted, I'm glad you brought that up. I, for the life of me, have never understood how John Brennan actually retained his security clearance, let alone after he went into private practice, was vetted and got through to be head of the CIA. I don't get it.
I don't know how people keep these security clearances for years and years and years. It seems to me, they're very sensitive, very important, and that we should control them a lot more, and they shouldn't certainly go with the personality after they leave office. There's no need for that. There are also, I'm told, over 1 million people who have top secret clearance in the government and in its consulting agencies. That seems like far too many people.
Oh, I agree, especially when it's clear that enough of them are willing to, let's just say in the case of Hillary Clinton, mishandle classified information. I mean, how many people around the last, we could just pick on Obama, we can pick on Obama and Bush, we can pick on Obama, Bush and Clinton, or even over this long time frame, how much sloppiness has there been? Allowing stuff that are not indictments, but just suspicions about rivals and enemies to float out there and then be used as levers in business and politics and elsewhere. There's got to be, a sea change in how this whole thing operates, don't you think, Ted?
Well, it is necessary. It has to be controlled. It has to be reined in. I think we classify too much information, but that's a whole different point. Secondly, I just think that we should have a system, and we used to have such a system, where the virtue of disinterestedness or impartiality was at play. I mean, at least when I was growing up, no one thought that, I guess during the Hoover days, in the 50s, that was different, but no one thought that the FBI was on one political side or the other. It was supposed to be an objective police force.
And Charles, you brought up Judge Knapp revealing that foreign intelligence services are used in this cooperative fashion. I think for a lot of people, including myself, that was like a completely unknown technique prior to that. But since then, we've seen a lot of indications that make me believe this is a regular practice. The Five Eyes is now being proposed to move to the Nine Eyes and integrate even more intelligence services. It seems like this worldwide web, for lack of a better term, that's just looking at everybody and acting as one unit.
Well, it's insidious because, information is the key in the modern information age, right, to success. And you can become, as the Google people did, as Zuckerberg did, you could become extraordinarily wealthy on the basis of trading on, not illegally on insider information, but by monetizing information. And so here we have in the United States this rich prize where, in theory, the government is not supposed to spy on U.S. citizens, absent going down the criminal process of getting a search warrant with probable cause and then issuing an indictment and going to trial. You're not supposed to have fishing expeditions mounted with the tremendous power that these technological tools offer governments and their contractors. So you're not supposed to do that. But then you look outside this country, UK being a big economy, it's only, I think, Ted, correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to say it's maybe a sixth the size of the US, a seventh in total?
Yeah, no, just last week, the state of California, its economy surpassed the economy of the UK as the fifth largest in the world.
Okay.
So you're spot on in terms of your statistics. But there are any number of intelligence agencies, obviously in European countries, but also in countries in the Middle East, in Asia. The Chinese are probably a much bigger threat than anybody else. And listening has become easier and easier and easier. So this is a problem that's going to be part of our future, and we have to get our hands around it.
Exactly. So, and then the other one we haven't mentioned is this guy Jake Clapper. Rather, we make James Clapper. We make fun of him almost every week because I'm somebody who I don't like gambling, but so I don't play poker. But this guy Clapper, you could tell when he's lying. He starts stroking his head and looking down. It's just obvious that he's lying, and there's so many clips of him saying,
you don't need to hire a psychologist to read his body language, and he's been caught up. There's some beautiful tapes of him testifying before Congress when it's very evident that he's not telling the truth, and he has not been telling the truth recently. Interesting, he's one of the co-conspirators in my plot to destroy Trump most seriously, but he and he and the former CIA head are now both talking heads, paid pundits on CNN.
Yeah.
Giving us 2 more reasons not to watch CNN.
As if you needed them.
Well, Ted, tell us then, if you would, give us more of flavor of what you want the readers to take away from your book. What are some of the important lessons learned that you explain in your book?
Well, there are some bombshells. I mean, I do go into depth about Christopher Steele. I call him Steele Christopher, sort of in the James Bondian sense, about his days as an MI6 agent. I think there's a lot more to know there. He's a specialist, if you didn't know this, in disinformation. He's a committed Fabian socialist. He has been from his college days, and he is politically opposed to President Trump. In fact, in one of the famous emails that we've seen now after the fact with the FBI, he says that he is passionately opposed to seeing Donald Trump as president of the United States. So he has a little bit more than motivation. He's an interesting character. And of course, the key agency in this whole concoction is Fusion GPS, the infamous opposition research firm who concocted this whole Red November storyline and was the one that paid Steele $160. Steele did all this for $168,000. I find that hard to believe. So I'm wondering, and this is one of the questions I ask, I don't have an answer to it, is who else is paying Steele?
Yeah, and how? Probably they're giving him Europeans are expert, some of them, at having offshore accounts, not necessarily to hold cash, but maybe to hold a warrant or an option or something that you can argue today doesn't have a lot of value, but so you don't have to declare it. But if a few things change, magically it's worth $100 million. I would guess there's something like that going on with Steele.
And of course, Steele's researcher, his collaborator, who wrote the dossier, I think, with him, and this proof of that is a woman named Nellie Orr, who is the wife of Bruce Orr, who is the top official in the Department of Justice, who's working on the Trump case, and she is on the payroll, if you can believe this, of Fusion GPS.
It's ridiculous.
It's too much. These storylines are almost too much to believe. If I were writing, a Tom Clancy novel, I really could not have put this kind of stuff together. And here it all falls right in our lap. And this is the big plot then, to conspire in a sense to delegitimize and then depose the president. And this whole thing was hatched, as I say, well before he was elected. And now this week we find out it was probably concocted even before we thought it was started in June or July of 2016, because the CIA and FBI had somebody embedded in the Trump campaign, as they call it, as an informant, as a spy.
See, what I wonder, Ted, and this may be, overly conspiratorial, or maybe it's just, as Jason likes to say, what do you call yourself, a conspiracy realist?
Yeah.
I wonder if this started way back in June of 2008, where a plot was hatched to get Obama elected with the support of the Clintons, who had more reach and access and experience doing this, and whether they didn't say, what we're going to do here, this is not about 2008, this is about 2010, 12, 14, 16, decades of a move to the left. We'll get the judges converted, we'll get the IRS converted, we'll get rid of our enemies. And I wonder if this recent skirmish, they want us to now focus only on 2015-16. I wonder about what really happened in 2012.
Sort of a hold my beer and watch this
right
moment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's good.
Well, we should be suspicious given what we know about this latest round. So, we could go back and, it's always good to have archivists and historians who are looking at the past And there is a kind of deja vu about some of this stuff, because Clapper is also the guy, if you didn't know, who went to the Congress and told them that the Iraqis had WND.
Wow.
Didn't he also have something to do with issuing the passports to the 19 hijackers out of Saudi Arabia?
I think his fingerprints are all over a lot of things. I like these pictures you're showing of him, where he's in a sweat, as it were.
But he was the station chief in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for the CIA.
That was Brennan, I think.
Oh, Brennan, sorry.
Brennan was in Saudi Arabia, yeah.
Right. All these Jameses, it's hard to keep track.
But
Clapper is an NSA guy, and I think he actually, has a long and distinguished history in intelligence. I believe he flew spy planes and other things. I'm not trying to discredit his history, but he obviously became very politicized and made some bad decisions along the way. I guess, when you think back on it, I was attracted to Trump because he was disruptive. But if you're on the other side of that, you don't really want to have disruption. You don't want to have somebody who's going to drain the swamp. You don't want somebody who's going to change your good thing.
Right.
And Trump was all about doing that, and I think is very much on course.
Let's hope so. So if we could go back to the So Ted, I don't know if there's more to talk about directly on your book. We could do that, or we could go to some of these other topics.
No, we can go to some other topics. I mean, the story about how the mainstream media fomented this fake news about the Russian dossier and this collusion so loudly and so continuously in a concerted effort is a whole nother story. So one of the pleas I make at the end of the book is that journalists might become journalists again, because it looks to me certainly like most of them had jettisoned their tradecraft, and they've become something quite far removed from the journalism, at least that I was familiar with in an earlier period.
Well, I remember back in the early 80s when I started working full-time after getting out of graduate school. That was a moment when I think you'd agree, Ted, that the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the major papers, they actually were journalists. And there were tabloids that would use the National Enquirer that would publish articles with no sources. And there's just suspicion or whatever. And now we're in a place, and I think actually in going back several years, we're in a place where tabloids like the National Enquirer seem to do a better job getting to the truth than CNN and MSNBC. Well, that's a low bar, but even the New York Times. I mean, when did it become appropriate in the New York Times to publish these stories where there's not, two sources or three sources, it's just a suspicion, or, the reporter, the editor doesn't like something? When did that become acceptable?
And so many anonymous sources, it is really not based on any fact whatsoever.
No.
And that's why, as we see, so many people are leaving these sources of information. And the news outlets, of course, have had, people leave by the droves, and these newspapers are very hard to sell, and people are going elsewhere, and there are a proliferation of other sources now for information. So that, I think, is another interesting fact in the times we're living through.
And then, of course, you have as well, you have a lot of experience with, as you mentioned, at Yale and Oxford, two wonderful institutions once. And also, I gather, with think tanks and other things. This whole complex of, well-endowed institutes and universities that can, gin up a study to make a politician look good or bad, and interact, immediately get the study's results whipped up into a frenzy in the media complex. That whole thing, when I think about it, looking at it as, and I know you have more experience looking at charities, when I think about a charity is not supposed to create any kind of private gain. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean financial gain. That means any edge or advantage.
So an educational institution is supposed to be a center of learning, by definition, involved in education. And many of these universities have become so politicized that obviously there's indoctrination going on in the classroom, but there's no diversity of intellectual opinion, and they're willing to. I mean, when I was at Yale, I used to jokingly say the far right wing at Yale begins with Barack Obama. I think we could name on one hand the faculty members at Yale who voted for President Bush.
Wow. Yeah, I'm missing my 40th reunion next week. I cannot stand, though I've been a loyal supporter of Yale and my parents as well. I get the magazine, the Yale Alumni magazine, and I can't even open the cover. I mean, the stories are so preposterous.
But don't you want to see all your old friends?
Well, yeah.
We should do an episode of Sunday with Charles from Yale. Go knock on the door at the Skull and Bones Club.
I was not a member of Skull and Bones. Stop it.
Now, there's a couple of questions coming from the audience on Periscope. One person is asking, as a Brit, why would Christopher Steele give a damn about Trump being president?
I'll let you take that, Ted.
Well, as I say, Christopher Steele was a committed socialist. So he was very opposed to an American capitalist entrepreneur becoming president. He's a known Fabian socialist whose motto or slogan is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and he was vehemently opposed to the referendum vote for Brexit. So he was very much afraid of the tide that was coming in, the flowing in of that nationalist kind of sentiment, and he wanted to do anything he could to stop this kind of president from coming to power, as did other people in Europe and certainly even in the British, I think, left-wing political circles. The other fact is that Christopher Steele, when he left MI6, started a business. He was an entrepreneur himself. He started a business intelligence company, and they had clients like this firm, Fusion GPS, and like some other countries for whom they would do these kinds of intelligence reports, and they made a living doing it. So, the more he did, the more he got paid.
It's really just fiction writing, isn't it? And then one other question from Periscope, Ted. There's a gentleman named Harmon Wilfred who has been on Crowdsource The Truth several times. He's America's first refugee, and he's a fellow Ohio native. Are you familiar with Harmon Wilfred at all?
I'm not, but I like the sound of it.
Well, we'll talk about that another time, perhaps. Should we move on with the slides, Charles?
Yeah, I was going to. We've covered this one about how Britain can thrive in a Brexit, but have you followed, Ted? Suddenly in the last several trading days, that we're back in the business of worrying about the what they call the pigs: Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, and Greece in the bond markets. Have you seen that?
No, I obviously follow this as an international economist very closely. I've also been to many of these countries. I've spoken in some of them. I've been quoted on Greece, actually, too much on the television. I've been very friendly with certain Italians who just won an election. So, there are some concerns about these non-performing or underperforming European economies. There's very high youth unemployment in those countries and others. There's also, I think, the whole proposition of the euro, which is really a fake currency, which is propped up by Germany and the European Central Bank, and it actually ties down many of the countries that you have listed on this list, who can't make their own economic policies, who can't change their monetary policies, and can't control their own inflation.
Yeah, I think we could well be. We're seeing. I'm actually relieved to see on the U.S. the 10-year Treasury yield is now above 3%. I think it's going to go higher. I hope.
And there are a number of emerging countries, of course, whose large debt is denominated in dollars, and that's going to be very painful for them as we ratchet up over the next coming months into the next year.
And you couple that with some of the, I remember whenever it was that fellow coined the BRIC concept, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And certainly now in Brazil and India, there are exploding, in the case of Brazil, it's many years in the making, India only recently, fraud scandals. one wonders how long it'll take for those same sorts of bubble problems to emerge out of China. Russia is actually, it's amazing to me that they're able to do as well as they're doing under sanction. They don't seem yet to have the same kind of problems, but that's something to watch. And then, Ted, this story of Iran threatening, this one here, you don't have to pull it up, Iran threatening to name the names of the people who took the bribes.
Wow.
That's,
Well, I mean, I don't want to encourage them to do it, but I sure hope they do.
I
mean,
want on this show, Ted, you can encourage them to do it because you would be joining me in that.
I mean, it would be very interesting. I see, Tyler and others have written about this, and one can only guess, who's on that list. It would be very, very, very interesting. And of course, Kerry is still out there acting as a kind of rogue agent on behalf of the Iranians, which is actually ludicrous.
Yeah, and guess where he's teaching now?
Yale.
Well, probably his own alma mater, right?
Yeah, he's back teaching. I had somebody tell me on the eve of the 2004 election that they had proof that Kerry was a responsible, I will not reveal the name of the person, but they had proof right before the 2004 election that John Kerry was turned down at Harvard Law School over their review at Harvard Law School of his doings in Vietnam. That's
Really?
why he didn't get in.
The Swift boat stuff.
Well, no, the basically siding with the enemy.
Well,
And that they didn't think, at that point, Harvard didn't think he was fit material to be a lawyer.
wow.
And I also have another friend who knew John Kerry when he was just starting out, and he's a nitwit when it comes to basic understanding of business. He's a spoiled brat.
He's got all that ketchup money.
Now he does. But this thing on the bribes, Ted, I think what likely may have happened, there's a story that came out this morning that all of that money, that 150 billion, may have been in the form of foreign currencies. Now, how did we come up with 150 billion of foreign currencies, and why did we send that? However we may have sent it. I think what may well have happened is that the U.S. was told to pay off Iran we need 150 billion, and Iran was told you're only going to get 100, something like that, and then 50 went off sideways. Would not surprise me at all.
Oh, well, that's a very nice shakedown, I guess. I mean, I know that because there are pictures of this, some billions, I think 1 to 2 billion, were actually delivered in foreign currencies in actual hard, dollar bills, euros, Swiss francs on crates on an airplane into Tehran.
And there's nothing suspicious about that, Ted. Didn't a fair amount of money go missing when Hillary was Secretary of State as well, out of the State Department?
Yeah, the number was, I think that I saw quoted was $93 million. So, it wasn't like, what did you say, a rounding error or somebody, bought pencils on the side, $93 million.
Right. I think out of the State Department, there was even more than that. I think it's more like the billions. I remember a figure of 8 billion that couldn't have been accounted for. Now, separately, what's happened is this, and the link, I don't know why it doesn't work here. Maybe didn't hit return on the link. Yeah.
So Bill Clinton is missing. This is news to me, Charles. I hope he's not ill.
Check the strip club.
Well, no,
maybe he's visiting his friend Bill Cosby.
Exactly, or Harvey Weinstein. But there's a great guy, a great author, James Patterson. He's one of America's, if not best, fiction writers, detective writers. But he's teamed with Bill Clinton, and to write this book, which comes out June 4th. And I mean, how they come up, how the people around the Clintons would allow Hillary to write this book, what happened, which tells us exactly what didn't happen. And now to write a book, the president is missing at a time when President Bill Clinton's records of his foundation are, I would argue, missing. His financial statements for the foundation are definitely missing. And Barack Obama's records, apparently, for the Presidential Foundation are also missing. I mean, how you could write a book like this, which takes, you've just written this book. How long did it take you from conception?
9 months full time. So, but he has help, obviously, writing this. Maybe it's really not a novel.
Well, that would make me very happy, actually.
Doesn't it really seem like Bill Clinton probably just put his name on this and James Patterson wrote it?
No, actually, the way I happen to know James Patterson's the guy who was his CEO, and they both met together at they were advertising buddies, and they were sitting around one day and they said, you know, this is boring. How can we make more money and have more fun? And they're both very good writers, so they came up with this idea. What Patterson does is he gets either prominent people like Bill Clinton or accomplished writers, and he gets Patterson edits the other person's work. You know, he doesn't do very much writing. He does put his mark on every book, but his business model is to churn out a book a month.
Wow.
And he's been doing it. Yeah, if you look into it.
More power to him. He sounds like he's on a successful model. It still sounds like the Bill O'Reilly model, killing whoever he's killing next.
Yeah, exactly. With Bill O'Reilly, you know, I wonder, you know, why he wants to kill everybody. He's killing Jesus. He's killing, you know. I don't think he's going to write a book killing Muhammad, though. But this book, how he could let such a book go out right now in the middle of the furor that is only going to build now as we go into campaign season, and it's not like Donald Trump is sitting there, you know, afraid to leave the Oval Office. I mean, he's tweeting like a maniac, I think, effectively, and he's also extremely good at these campaign rallies. How you could, you know, serve up this piece of red meat for Donald Trump to just hit it, you know, to the next galaxy? I don't get it. But he's going to make a lot of money off this.
Maybe it's just wishful thinking, and the title should be President Trump, I wish he were gone.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Trump is, is backing down. In fact, with Rudy Giuliani and Jay and other lawyers on his staff, it seems like quite the opposite. I think he said this the other day. He's never walked away from a fight.
Right, and good for that. If we go to the next...
Bully for him.
Yeah. No, not next slide. The last link. Sorry. There is the Political Insider story. There's some really interesting stuff going on near Cleveland in Chicago at the Obama Library. And how closely have you been following this, Ted?
I have not been following this because I've been immersed in the, plot to destroy Trump. So I do know some of the details, but I'm reading it as we go here.
All right. Well, I'll summarize it for you just because it's really interesting. It turns out when you go into the history, as I've now done, of presidential libraries for presidents who were operating in the internet age, George H.W. Bush left in '93 before most people used the internet. Sort of came to the fore in July, I believe, of '94. There was something called DARPANET that people used, but the internet really began being used early in '94, and then flourished using dial-up predominantly while Bill was president, right? And then you had W, and then you had Obama,
who couldn't spell internet.
But when you go in, as I've done now, so I went back and I looked at the history of how the records that were created or received, that's the definition of presidential records. They're the property of Ted Malloch and Jason Goodman and Charles Ortel and Americans. They're our property. Those records can only go into a presidential library if it is validly organized and operated, and if the archivist certifies before the records get into the library that an endowment has been created for the perpetual care of these records, right? In the case of Bill Clinton, wouldn't you know that on November 19th, 2000, in the middle of the Bush v. Gore contest, which wasn't settled until I think December 12th or so, 2000, that Bill Clinton's people arranged to send 100,000 pounds, 50 tons, 100,000 pounds of records were sent out of the National Archives to Little Rock.
It's hard to believe
before there was any organization, before there were any people, and they were a satellite group of the National Archives and Records Administration, rented a former Chevrolet dealership building and put these records in there. So there's never been real custody and control, in my mind, of the records that actually were created under Bill Clinton's presidency. Later in, I think, the February, March, April timeframe in 2001, just as the FBI was investigating the Clinton Foundation, a whole bunch more records went out to Little Rock. Who knows what was diverted, what was stolen, what was burned, what was bleach bit back then. And now, recently, with the case of the Obama Foundation, Judicial Watch, I noticed this many months ago, and Jerry wrote about it, Jerry Corsi. Judicial Watch was asking for something out of the Obama presidency, and the answer came back, we don't have those records anymore, the Obama Foundation has them. Well, the Obama Foundation doesn't have anything yet.
Doesn't exist yet.
Well, it has a legal organization that is illegally organized, it's been illegally operated, there's no building, you know, it can't get anything across the line. How could it have the records?
I love it that the theft is so vast, it's got to be measured by the pound.
But,
or the ton.
But if you think about it, you know, back in the day, when well before the internet, when I was doing mergers and acquisitions in all these complicated deals, and you still printed documents using a printer, not like use a commercial printer, you would think carefully before asking a secretary to type something up that you'd handwritten. You wouldn't go through a whole bunch of drafts. You know, you'd think about it carefully, you'd make changes sparingly, you get the thing out. Now in the internet age, what happens is people will go through 100 drafts of something instead of just getting it right out. And so think of the volume of material, the difference in the volume of material between what H.W. Bush's 4 years of presidency produced, what Bill's did just as the internet started, then what W's should have done, and now under the Obama period, think how many records there should be. Think how many of the Obama people were using aliases. You know, we already know it's common practice for many of these cabinet people. Multiple fake email, and, you know, and who has custody and control over all those presidential records? And think about how much mischief you can make, you know, in academia and elsewhere. You know, putting all the damaging records in the burner, and you know, just keeping the ones that make Obama look good.
Scandal-free administration.
Your notoriously scandal-free administration. And then you have Clapper saying, and people saying around the NSA that, wait a minute, every keystroke in America that anybody has hit since about mid-2004, the NSA has, right? So the politicians think they're being clever, maybe around Obama and Bush and others, putting these records to the side, but what if Clapper and the NSA actually have them? Think of the power that gives members of the NSA over the political establishment. And I think that's a story that we shouldn't be shy about talking about. I mean, that is too much power in the hands of a faceless bureaucracy, in my view.
Yeah, no, and in the case of some technology companies who are either in bed with them or have inordinate power themselves.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent points. So if we could go to the next slide, I want to give a shout out to, I don't know, you may know Marsha Blackburn, Ted. I've had the good fortune.
Yeah, no, she's a fine congressperson. She's been there a long time, and she's a Trump favorite, and I'm pretty confident she's going to be the next senator from Tennessee.
Well, I hope she'll be listening to this. They were very helpful to me in trying to get exposure for this Clinton Foundation fraud. We tried with a bunch of different congresspeople and senators, and it was Marsha Blackburn, who right after I wrote the articles and the first thing in March and April of 2015, she demanded action of the IRS, and she was ridiculed. This is back before Trump announced. This was in May of 2015. They savaged her in the press. The IRS sent her back a form letter, you know, dear, you know, whatever it was, dear person, you know, forget it, we're not going to do anything. Didn't even give her the courtesy of, you know, she's a congressperson who's actually pretty senior and chairs a number of different subcommittees. So they treated their first request, they slapped it away, and then about a year later, she got a whole bunch of colleagues together. This was in June, July of 2016. So this is a crucial moment in the evolution of your story about the deep state and everything. She stood up and said, God damn it, I want this something to happen. And the IRS had to admit in July that they were going to do something. And we'll get the mettle, we'll test the mettle of Inspector General Horowitz when we see how deeply he has gone in his studies here, examining the motives of the people who wanted to, you know, interfere in the election. One of the big motives was to cover up, in my opinion, the abuses of the IRS while Bill Clinton was president, going even further back, probably while H.W. was president, and then when they were supposed to be investigating under W. Bush, the Clinton Foundation, the investigation that didn't happen, to pull on those sets of strings hard. When you do so, you will uncover the real motives that Mueller and Comey and Rosenstein and the Clintons and Obama have. They don't want the real story coming out of just how corrupt this Clinton Foundation has been for so many now decades. And it was Marsha Blackburn who stood up, took the slings and arrows. She even got her staff person to do an excellent report. This one here, I wonder if we can pull that one up.
You've just described what would be a much bigger book, Charles. What didn't happen?
Well, this is, I don't know if you had a chance to read this report, Ted. The Clinton Foundation and it should say the India story, self-serving philanthropy, watered-down drugs, and money in sub-Saharan Africa. This is something that her staff did a fantastic job on. And it's a much bigger story than people yet understand, because people are fond of saying, I spent a lot of time in India, I was on the board of an Indian company, fond of saying it's an Indian miracle, and isn't it all great what's happened since 1995? No, it's not so great. What's happened since 1995 is that Indian regulators, you think it's bad competing for lax regulations between London and New York. In India, there are no regulations, particularly for the bigger companies. And so the Indian government encouraged multinationals to go manufacture stuff, do outsourcing in India, and then they did not take care of and control of the secrets of the formulas or whatever. And there is a gigantic bubble out there, which was blown up in part by Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, who really, in the past, I'm not saying we would want to do this, but in the past, America favored Pakistan. And it was under Bill that we shifted towards India and inflated this gigantic bubble. So she laid the groundwork in this great work that was done back in 2016, right before the election. And if we go back to the slides, Jason, we don't need to pull it up, but there's a big rally going to be in Nashville a week from Tuesday after Memorial Day. It's going to be a fantastic rally. Well, Donald Trump is going to do one of his trademark ralies in Nashville. Marsha is running. She's going to be front and center at that rally. I don't know how many of those rallies you've watched. I've watched many of them. And it's not only American theater, it's American history. And it's just wonderful what he's doing.
Well, that's definitely one to, put into your calendar and to look forward to, because Trump will be pretty wound up by then. And it's a great audience in Tennessee. I'm sure that will be very enthusiastic. A lot of deplorable people out there.
And I think Nashville is famous for something. What is it, country music, I think?
And barbecue.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of warming up for the crowd beforehand. But with all this as background, we've talked, Ted, about this before. I don't know if you've read Cheryl Atkinson's book, The Smear.
Oh, yeah. No, I know Cheryl,
And so page 242, she talks about in her book, right after Marsha had stirred up the IRS, the New York Times refused to cover the fact that there were 4 FBI field offices investigating the Clinton Foundation in August of 2016, and that's around when Sally Yates gave the stand-down order, it's rumored, to McCabe and others to shut this thing down. And I mean, Horowitz had better cover that in his report, or we'll know.
So you're saying Sally Yates' fingerprints are on this one too?
Yeah. Yeah.
They love stand-down orders. They gave that in Benghazi as well.
That's right. They're good at that. So I think we're at a place, Ted, thanks to your excellent work and others, we're at a place now, a rare place, where people on the right and people on the left are beginning to look at what has happened since September 11th, 2001 in particular, or maybe going all the way back to 1988, and they're saying, wait a minute, this experiment has helped, Mark Zuckerberg, and it's helped these cronies, and it's helped the Clintons, but it hasn't helped the average American, whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning. When you adjust these income figures, and the wealth figures, et cetera, to try to adjust for inflation, which is tough to do. But when you do it, and you adjust for after-tax income, and you adjust for, how quickly the costs of things that can change your fortune have risen, like education. From '88 to the present, the cost of education has far outstripped wage growth. And when you start looking at this, I think what is going on now is a sea change, where actually Donald Trump may do something that nobody expected, which was to disrupt the Republican establishment and the Democratic establishment in a moment where we really don't need political parties as citizens the way we might have needed them prior to 1988.
Why do you feel that way?
Well, because in the old days, it was very tough to do what we're doing now with Ted over there in the UK, and we just did this on relatively short notice. We've got a big audience. You've been doing this for less than a year.
Yeah, you can circumvent, or disintermediate, and thereby, some of these institutions, I think political parties amongst others, are less and less necessary. I mean, they're in effect no longer ideologically supportable, and they, all they do is come into existence to help elect people during a short window to collect funds to do that. So they may have much, much less importance, I think, looking ahead, particularly if there are more candidates like Donald Trump.
So let's hope there are. So we're on the final slide in the next page, and all right, so we're hearing over here, Ted, I don't know what you're hearing, that this Inspector General report, Ed Henry of Fox said this morning that it may be out midweek.
Well, we've been hearing this though for some months, and then it gets delayed and delayed. I think it was supposed to come out in March. So I know I watched the talk shows this morning, and people are saying, including Congressman Gowdy, that he set up hearings for the first week of June, which should suggest that it's imminent.
Yeah, and it would make sense. I mean, I don't know how long this report's going to be. I doubt it's going to be 1 million pages. It's probably going to be hundreds of pages. And it would make a lot of sense to get such a report out before Memorial Day, so that those of us
reading?
Well, no, those of us who care about this stuff would have 3 days to read about it, while the media basically goes silent, and then get back to it with a vengeance. So for practical reasons, to get this out there, particularly if it is as damning as I suspect it might be,
that's the inference, that there's a lot of damning stuff in there, and that there will be, again, I'm not a prosecutor, but there will be a number of people who have to worry about criminal implications.
Yeah, on that, you probably saw Joe DeGenova, he's a friend, and I'm sure you know him, saying that James Brennan better get himself a good criminal defense attorney, and I think that's, and he wasn't thinking of Joe DeGenova doing it, he was just saying, you better get yourself a
I doubt it would be him.
Yeah. And then we have the debate about whether or not Robert Mueller can indict a sitting president, and I've seen...
Why is that a debate? I mean, we know the answer to that. That's a constitutional, it's just part of our constitutional history. There's certain things you can and can't do. I mean, he can certainly issue a subpoena. Doesn't mean it has any, any backbone, or that it has to be supported.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I saw Ted Olson's piece in the Weekly Standard making that point, but then I heard Judge Knapp on Fox making a counter-argument that actually you can indict. And I actually found Ted Olson's arguments more persuasive than Judge Knapp's.
Well, maybe we'll go to the Supreme Court. I personally doubt we'll get to it. I don't believe there'll be any subpoena issued by Robert Mueller for President Trump.
I thought you could indict a ham sandwich.
Right, but not a ham sandwich who's the President of the United States. He's too big a ham sandwich. So, Stefan Halper, have you run across him?
Well, we've all run across him in the last week.
I mean, personally, have you run?
No one would say his name, and now I guess somebody sent me today the New York Post has a whole big piece on him with his picture. So all I can say is read those wonderful websites and places like the New York Post, because it's all out there now.
Right, but a person could have such an outside role in all this, who is, I mean, I gather he's been around politics and academia for a long time, but it's just difficult for me to understand this.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
You know, I mean, we have the very same Democrats who are out there saying, you know, that we ought to do away with the Electoral College, are very happy to let one person like this play God, and, you know, potentially instigate a coup in the United States of America. I mean, this is.
My understanding is that he is this should surprise no one. Of course, you know, he's married to someone whose father was one of the top people in the CIA, but he is a well-known neocon who was a very vocal never Trumper.
And is there any link between his professorship in Cambridge and Cambridge Analytica?
No.
That I know of. But I think Cambridge Analytica is out of business.
Yeah.
They had a what they call, well, we call it bankruptcy. They call it administration in the UK.
Yeah, that was, it was interesting to see that the Mercers, very wealthy hedge fund people, I think were funding Cambridge Analytica. And I don't think we yet know the whole story of what was going on with that, because Mercer sort of distanced himself from Trump and then distanced himself from Bannon, and then, you know, there's some piece of this that we don't yet know, which I hope we will find out. So if we go back to the slides, yeah, there's this other shadowy person, this one here, this BBC link. Should come
Joseph
up. Mifsud, I think it is. Joseph Mifsud.
Yeah, Mifsud. Yeah, he's a professor that supposedly, well, again, all these professors, I've never heard of, you know, they don't have a lot of academic articles to my knowledge, but he's supposedly he's an ambassador, I see. He's supposedly someone who got involved with Papadopoulos and, you know, was tied to the Russians or something.
Is this the guy who was having cocktails?
Yeah, he has a very shadowy background, it all turns out.
Right, and you know, this is something that we see with the Clintons in particular, and actually, if you think about it, with the Obama presidency, here you had a guy. I remember in the WikiLeaks Podesta dump that Ben Rhodes was after Obama won. He tried to get a security clearance, and the Bush White House would not issue him a transition security clearance. There's something odd in his record. Then he ends up being in a senior position on the National Security Council, Ben Rhodes.
Deputy.
You know,
also very involved in the unmaskings, it will turn out.
Right. And you know, these people, that's why I stay away from politics. I think in politics there's a feeling that, you know, there is no such thing as right or wrong. You're just fighting for your candidate, and if a dirty trick needs to happen, you know, you'll do it. And maybe not tell the candidate about it, but if it benefits the candidate, that'll help the candidate, and you'll be in his good stead. And that's the kind of thinking that young people generally get involved with, although sadly a lot of older people get involved with it too. And you know, I'm just dumbfounded at all the Papadopoulos, this guy, all these people would think that it's okay to, as you say in your book, mount a coup against a duly elected president. I mean, isn't the penalty for that kind of severe?
Well, I think it's called treason, the last time I checked. I was not a big supporter of Obama. It shouldn't surprise you. But, you know, he was elected president. He, you know, had a certain dignity, you could say, and he held the office. You know, we had to respect him for having won 2 elections.
Well, he won at least one. The verdict on 2012, I don't know. But anyway, if we can go back into the slides, we're almost done. Jason, you've done a lot of work on the Imran Awan scandal. And I don't know how closely you've been following that, Ted, but I think we're finally going to get, we don't have to pull it up, but there's a story on Fox News. We're finally going to get a lot more visibility into how and why so many Democratic congressmen use this firm of Pakistanis for their internet, their IT records, for their devices, and you know, it wasn't just like 1 or 2. It was the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. It was it was the man who's now Attorney General of California, Xavier Becerra. It was, I think, how many, Jason? Was it 40?
More than that. But this is interesting that they're saying that the delays are related to a new federal probe, because our Diet Coke retrieving friend, Christopher Gowan, he blamed the delays on a steady stream of allegations against Owan that have been published online, especially by the Daily Caller. Well, in the streets of Washington, D.C., he's blamed me for fake news, but I guess, you know, all that Diet Coke, they say it can put holes in your brain. Perhaps Chris Gowan was drinking some of those Diet Cokes he retrieved for President Clinton.
Well, I think, though, that this Imran Awan story, Ted, is going to get a lot of traction, particularly now that the tensions with the U.S. and as Barack Obama likes to say, Pakistan, are escalating so high. I mean, you talk about a country that has nuclear weapons, a lot of them, and it has, in the ISI, their equivalent of their security service, they have people who, let's just say, corrupt doesn't begin to discuss those people. And I think we're seeing this bubble up dramatically. It could bubble up in the summer here.
What about the human equivalent of an EMP, Mrs. Wasserman Schultz? She's heavily involved in this Imran case. She's been conspicuously quiet lately, hasn't she?
Yeah. Well, this is an area, the failure, I mean, Hillary Clinton is being investigated for mishandling classified intelligence data, and I think, you know, the same sort of investigation needs to go into Debbie Wasserman Schultz and these people who are using Imran Awan.
Yeah.
So if we finish up on the slides, people have been talking about a blue wave, Ted, in particular. I'm sure in London they may talk about it. In Greenwich Village, where I live, they talk about it. I'm sure in Los Angeles and San Francisco they're talking about it.
I've seen them taking back some of that analysis, and the pollsters themselves are saying because of the president's popularity, because of the state of the economy, because they're sick and tired of all this Russian collusion stuff, that there's now a chance that maybe there won't be such a big wave and it could be a wash.
Well, I would go so far as to say, I mean, I think if we have an economic, you know, stock market crash, or, you know, something that hurts the pocketbook, the wallets of the average American between now and election, then I won't be quite so confident. But if Americans continue to see rising incomes, rising after-tax incomes, if there are any of these mooted foreign policy successes in Korea, in Iran, or elsewhere, putting Europe back together, I think we could very well see actually a red wave, not a blue wave, but a red wave.
Well, I think in the Senate, it's quite likely that we'll pick up, that is, the Republicans will pick up a number of seats. I know one of my close friends, the Attorney General in Missouri, is very likely to win in that election, and there are a number of others where I think we're very well positioned. There are a large number of Republicans, of course you know this, who are retiring from the House of Representatives. So part of the story would be which candidates are we actually putting in those races that can win.
Well, if your close friend is the Attorney General of Missouri, tell him to take a look at our work on the Clinton Foundation, because he could certainly discipline the Clinton. I don't know how good their charity laws are, come to think of it, but you know, we're on a campaign now to get as many U.S. state attorney generals as possible to look at this, and as many equivalent foreign governments to look at this. And of course, you know, we've said on this broadcast many times that multiple U.S. attorneys and the IRS and the U.S. Postal Service and others are all now looking at this. Another thing, you know, when we talk about inflation, inflation is insidious, cost inflation. And I don't know if you see it over there in the UK the way I see it in the U.S. now, Ted. I think inflation really, in food, as we talk about education, it's going to be offset.
Yeah, no, it's bubbling up, and you know, obviously in energy costs as well. So it is something to. I mean, we have had a fairly long period where it has been lower than normal, but it's bubbling right back up. Whether it will burst or not, and to what extent, I think there's a lot of conjecture. But I mean, there are countries in the world, not so much in Europe or the U.S., where it is, continuing problem.
Yeah, and that's going to be another story to watch here. That I think housing prices and rents are going to offset some of it, but I do think in the ways that really hurt, trying to put food on the table for a lower middle class family or a lower income family, I think we're going through a rugged patch here, and it's a good thing that the Fed, in my view, is raising rates before inflation runs away. So, and we're almost done. We have the, we don't need to pull either of these stories up, Jason, but I've been watching with concern. Now China apparently is landing its long-range bombers on these disputed islands, and
It happened this weekend for the first time. So, I mean, many of us, I'm not a political military analyst, but it seemed very predictable to me that they weren't just making coral reefs out there.
right. And what this, China actually in its long history, recent history, has not been a military expansionist, but these sorts of moves, coupled with a close review, an ongoing review that I do of UNCTAD data on the economic data on China, is extremely scary when you look at the degree to which their investment, annual investment, its growth in the stock of investment is so large relative to the size of consumption inside the economy. And I think this, seeing worrying economic signs and aggressive military moves point to me that there could be big danger in the Chinese economy, not even before you consider what Trump is trying to do addressing trade fairness and other issues.
Yeah, I know. There have been some very good analysts on China, which I got in trouble for a number of years ago, saying would at some point implode. You're not allowed to say such things about China, but their economic balance sheet, is not one to brag about.
Right, and I think, and the last point here is that Iran. I think Iran is feeling far more pain than the mullahs are letting on in their aggressive speeches about Trump and America. I think these sanctions are really biting, and I think the internal resistance movements, the people who were put down in 2009, see an opportunity here. And so I'm actually quite hopeful, barring unforeseen disaster, that the aggressive moves Trump's made on Chinese trade, on North Korea, and on Iran, and on Europe actually could all fall in place.
Doesn't Iran have a C-130
No,
airplane
it looks
filled
like
with
a brilliant strategy from where I sit, and the Europeans are not happy with at least 2 out of those 3, so they haven't been our ally, at least in this round. And when it comes to Iran, they're meeting rather continuously to try to find ways to continue to do business with Iran. But I think the larger European countries, I know Siemens said this last week, will just find it impossible to trade off small business opportunities in Iran for the entire U.S. market.
Well, it's so pleasant doing business in Iran, I'm sure, compared to doing business in the United States.
Well, I've never been there. It's one of the few countries in the world I've never been to.
Well, Ted, you've been very generous with your time. Are you going to go on a book tour now? Or are you?
Well, I don't think we do book tours anymore. We do lots of social media and we do lots of television when we can. And I was on Tucker Carlson, I guess, last week, and the book sales went through the roof. So I guess that's the way we sell books these days.
That's very good.
James Comey and Hillary Clinton have done book tours. If you want to get yelled at by Laura Loomer, you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'd love to go on The View.
Yeah, right. That'd be fun. So are you, and where are you now? Where's your primary focus these days? Are you?
Well, my primary focus has been this book and getting it finished. My next focus is going to be over the summer, taking a few days off, working on a couple of corporate projects that I've been working on for various corporations, and attending my youngest son's wedding later in California.
Oh, great!
So,
Congratulations.
Family affairs.
Great. Well, thanks again, Ted. Thanks for everything that you do.
Well, thanks for all your great work, Charles. I read everything you do, and there's no one with the thoroughness that you have. So, continue apace.
Will do, sir. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, Ted. Well, there we go, Charles. Ted Malloch, the book, of course, The Plot to Destroy Trump. People can get that from Amazon, or perhaps if they choose a retailer that is not owned by the CIA, they can get that all over the place. But that was nice speaking with Ted right there. Good to hear from him.
Well, I think one thing you learn, I think, through this process is that when the media starts howling at somebody, like a Trump, like a Malloch, like a Bannon, you name it, it's probably because they're very threatened by that person and what they stand for. And when I had the good fortune of meeting Ted, spending time with him several years ago, and he's a measured and thoughtful guy. He's been at this for a long time. He doesn't come out of a traditional academic environment. In other words, he didn't get his PhD and then just stay in academia his whole life. He's done a lot of different things. As he says, he's written 17 books.
It's a lot.
So good luck. I'm having trouble with my first one.
I don't think I've read 17 books.
I have. But no, it's a real treat to have him on. We'll follow his stuff closely. We encourage the crowdsourcers to please buy his book and read it and share it. Jason, I don't know if you have anything you want to report about your research.
There were some late-breaking stories that came in that we could talk about real quickly. I had those over here. Where did we have that? Okay, so this was on Zero Hedge about Putin asking for Iran's exit from Syria meeting with Assad. What did you think about this one, Charles?
Well, if this is true, this is really hopeful in my view, because when you think about, I've been saying all along, you think about the punishment that the Russian economy has had under sanctions now, for now, how many years is it they've been under sanction? And if there is a backdoor set of discussions going on involving the US and Russia, how Russia might be able to help the world forge peace. I mean, if we were able to, if Putin actually looked at this, as I hope he is, and said, you know what, I'd much rather, I see the deal North Korea is getting for mending its ways. I like that kind of deal. I like to be off sanction. I'd like to be, get a whole bunch of Western investment, which would make sense actually for Russia to invest. If the US and other foreign investors were to invest, not throwing money into Russia, but cautiously, judiciously, into helping Russian companies that have distinctive global technologies sell those technologies and products and services into primarily the Western European market, Eastern European market, maybe into the US. There's a tremendous opportunity to do that. So if actually the Russians see the economic potential, they exert great leverage over Iran. And if they can convince Iran to get the hell out of Syria, we could dramatically reset the peace process, kicking Iran out of these troublesome other countries. I did an interview actually for Sputnik News with the great Ekaterina Blanova, articulating some of this, and she was of the opinion that it's unlikely that Russia is going to abandon traditional allies like Syria and Iran. But what if they did? Suddenly Russia got together with us, and now we've got Iran standing alone. We've got Israel unified with Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. I mean, you could actually see the potential for Middle East peace, lasting Middle East peace, and a whole change in the way in which we in the West worry about Russian military might, Russia worries about NATO and the US arming. I mean, you could see a gigantic tectonic plates move for the better.
But isn't Russia concerned with Syria because of this natural gas pipeline? And doesn't Russia currently control like 80% of the natural gas in Europe?
Well, Russian natural gas does flow. A lot of it does flow into Europe. There's other pipelines trying to go into Europe, but there's also our liquefied natural gas that we're trying to export, and other things we're trying to export into Europe. So I think they'd have to balance out. Russia is trying to become less reliant on the energy sector, and going all in to try to go up against the West when you don't have a very diversified economy, and when the United States is already spending on its own many times what Russia is spending. it doesn't seem like
On
it's
military
it doesn't seem like the most intelligent route.
Is this a mini Putin, Charles?
I don't know how tall either gentleman is. I think this guy's pretty tall, and I don't know. I don't believe
Assad looks tall.
he's pretty tall, unless he's standing on a chair or something.
Giant Assad. Well, so I think that's all we've got for today, Charles. So perhaps we'll see everyone on Wednesday as you continue to close in. I hope people will become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth. It is a community-sponsored resource, and as I go around the world to New Zealand and Los Angeles and the various places, the bills add up. So if people are enjoying the shows, enjoying the reporting, I hope they'll go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and become a monthly sponsor coming up towards the end of the month here. It's amazing how quickly time's flying. We're almost halfway through 2018 already. People can also make a one-time sponsorship payment at paypal.me/crowdsourcethetruth. Charles, thank you very much again for another excellent Sunday with Charles. I'll see you later. Thanks everyone for watching. See you tomorrow.
Thank you.